The locker that never opened. Welcome to our chilling tales, a journey into fear. Tonight, we bring you a horrifying story set in a place we all know too well. A school. But not just any school. A place where the walls remember, where the shadows whisper, and where some students never leave. Get ready for a night of terror as we unfold this spine-chilling tale. Chapter 1. The Legend of Locker 329. St. Vincent High School had stood for over 50 years. Generations of students had walked its halls, but some whispers never faded. There were always rumors, always stories, especially about Locker 329. It was at the far end of the north hallway, just past the janitor's closet. Unlike the other lockers, this one looked older, almost as if it didn't belong. The paint was chipped, the metal rusted, and a faint, eerie scent of dampness surrounded it. New students often tried to open it, thinking it was just another unused locker, but no matter how hard they pulled, it never opened. Some said it was welded shut. Others believed it was cursed. Then there were the seniors. "Don't touch that locker," they'd say in hushed voices, "or it'll touch you back." Chapter 2. Ethan's Curiosity. Ethan was a transfer student, bold, fearless, and skeptical. He didn't believe in ghost stories. When his friends told him about the haunted locker, he laughed. "Come on," he scoffed. "It's just an old jammed locker. You really believe some ghost is living in there?" His friend Jake shook his head. "It's not a joke, man. Kids have disappeared." Ethan rolled his eyes. "Oh, come on. Who disappeared?" Jake hesitated. "Nobody knows. But seniors say that every few years, someone vanishes near that locker. It always happens after someone tries to open it." Ethan smirked. "All right then, I'll prove it's all fake." The school had emptied out for the day. The only sound was the distant echo of footsteps from a teacher leaving the staff room. The lights flickered slightly, casting long shadows on the hallway walls. Ethan walked toward locker 329. His heartbeat was steady, his mind clear. It was just a locker, nothing more. Placing his hand on the cold, rusted handle, he yanked. Nothing. He pulled again, harder this time. Still nothing. His friend stood a few steps behind, watching. The hallway suddenly felt colder. The air was still, unnaturally quiet. Just as Ethan turned to mock them, click. The locker door creaked open on its own. A wave of damp, musty air hit him. A deep, metallic scent filled his nostrils. Inside, the locker was empty. But the walls inside weren't normal. They were scratched, deep, desperate claw marks dug into the metal. There were also words, barely visible, etched into the back. "Let me out." Ethan's smirk faded. He felt a sudden chill crawl up his spine. The air grew heavy, like something was watching him. Then, a whisper. "Finally, you opened it." Chapter 3. The Vanishing. Before Ethan could react, the locker door slammed shut. A loud bang echoed through the empty hallway. Jake and the others rushed forward. "Ethan!" Jake yanked at the locker door. It wouldn't budge. "Come on, man, quit messing around." No response. Panic set in. They pulled, kicked, and banged on the metal. Nothing worked. Then, a soft knocking. It was coming from inside the locker. A slow, rhythmic tap. Tap, tap, tap. Then Ethan's muffled voice. "Guys, let me out." Jake froze. Ethan's voice sounded wrong. It was distant, strained, like it wasn't coming from inside the locker, but from somewhere far away. again. I was waiting for you. The locker shuddered violently. The metal warped, bending outward as if something was trying to push through. The lights flickered wildly, the hallway filled with an awful, rotting stench. Jake and the others ran. They didn't stop until they reached the parking lot. Their hearts pounded, breath ragged. When they finally got a teacher and returned, the locker was sealed shut again. No sign of Ethan, just his backpack lying on the floor. Chapter 4. The School's Secret. The principal called Ethan's parents. The police searched the entire school. No one found a single trace of him. The janitor refused to talk about it. Some teachers whispered about similar cases from years ago. One of them, an old librarian, muttered, "It happens every few years. A new student tries to open it, and then they're gone. The school always covers it up." By the next morning, locker 329 was sealed shut again. Jake and his friends never spoke about it. The fear was too much. But sometimes, when they passed that hallway at night, they could hear it. Tap, 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 the slow, eerie sound of someone knocking from the inside. And if you listen closely, beneath the knocking, you can still hear a voice. "Let me out." The substitute teacher. Welcome to our chilling tales, a journey into fear. Chapter 1, a new face in the classroom. Westwood High School was an ordinary school. Strict teachers, long hallways, and students who couldn't wait to graduate. But room 306, that classroom was different. It was at the far end of the 3rd floor, where the windows were always shut and the air felt strangely thick. Some students swore they heard whispers from inside, even when the room was empty. Others claimed they saw shadows moving when no one was there. Then came the day everything changed. Mr. Howard, the history teacher, didn't show up for class. No one had seen him that morning, and the principal simply announced that he had called in sick. Instead, a new teacher arrived. She was tall and thin, almost unnaturally so. Her skin was pale, her dark eyes sunken deep into her face. She wore old-fashioned clothes, like something from a different era. "My name is Miss Langley," she said, her voice soft but chilling. She never blinked. "Open your books to page 66, she instructed. The students obeyed. Then something strange happened. The words on the page began to change. The ink twisted and shifted, forming words that weren't there before. "Do not look up." A cold shiver ran through the class. Some students exchanged nervous glances. Claire, sitting in the middle row, felt her pulse quicken. Her breathing became uneven. Something felt wrong. Chapter 2. The lesson that wasn't. The room grew colder. The fluorescent lights flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls. Miss Langley walked between the rows, her footsteps silent, her movements too smooth, too precise. No one spoke, no one dared. But Claire couldn't resist. She raised her eyes slightly, just enough to see Miss Langley's face. Her mouth stretched into a grin, unnatural, inhumanly wide. Her eyes, they were completely black. Not dark brown, not even the white part remained. Just pure, endless black. Claire's stomach dropped. She quickly looked back down at her book, her hands trembling. But the words on the page had changed again. "You shouldn't have looked." Her breathing became shallow, her heartbeat pounding in her ears. She glanced at the students around her. No one else was reacting. They were frozen, their eyes locked on their books, their expressions blank. Not blinking, not breathing. Something was wrong. Then, Miss Langley spoke again. "Who can tell me about the Battle of Hollow Creek?" Silence fell. She smiled wider. Then her neck twisted at an impossible angle. A sickening crack echoed in the room. Claire gasped. Miss Langley snapped her head back into place like a puppet on invisible strings. Claire's hands shook violently. She had to get out. Chapter 3. The Escape Attempt. Claire slowly reached for her bag. She didn't want to attract attention. Miss Langley's back was turned. She was writing on the board now. The chalk screeched against the surface. But the words weren't history notes. They were names. The names of every student in the room. Claire's breath caught in her throat when she saw what was written beside them. A single word, missing. Her name was at the bottom, the last one. And next to it, tonight. A shiver ran down her spine. She gripped the edge of her desk and slowly started standing up. She had to be careful, quiet. But just as she was about to take a step, the classroom door slammed shut. The lights went out. The air turned freezing. A low whisper filled the room, coming from every direction at once. "Where do you think you're going?" Claire's chest tightened. Her breath came in quick, shallow gasps. She turned toward the door. It was no longer there. The walls had shifted. The entire classroom had changed. The windows were gone. The posters on the wall had melted into black stains. And the students, they were all staring at her now. But their faces weren't right anymore. Their mouths stretched too wide. Their eyes completely black. Just like Miss Langley's. Claire's knees buckled. She stumbled back, heart racing. This wasn't a classroom anymore. It was a trap. And she was the next victim. Chapter 4. The Last Student. The whispers grew louder. The walls closed in. Claire screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the darkness. Miss Langley stepped forward, her grin stretching further than humanly possible. "You should have kept your eyes down," she whispered. Then everything went black. Chapter 5. The Aftermath. The next morning, the janitor unlocked room 306. The desks were empty. The books were open. The chairs were in place. But there were no students. No Claire. No one. Just silence. And on the blackboard, in neat, perfect handwriting, a single sentence was written. "Class dismissed. End of the tale, but not the fear." These were just stories. Or were they? Perhaps somewhere in the world, a teacher waits for her next class. Sleep well, if you can. Story 1. The Whispering Woods. There was a village named Ravenshade, hidden deep in the valley, surrounded by a thick, ancient forest. The villagers feared the forest, especially at night. They believed the trees held trapped souls, whispering secrets to lure people inside. The elders often told tales of those who had entered the woods after dark. None had ever returned. Sam, a 15-year-old boy with a rebellious heart, didn't believe in such stories. "It's just wind in the trees," he would say. Nothing more. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the sky turned a deep shade of purple, Sam's friends dared him. "Go into the woods," one of them challenged. "Spend just 1 hour inside, and we'll believe you're the bravest among us." Sam smirked, grabbed a lantern, and walked toward the forest. "I'll be back in an hour," he said confidently. As he stepped past the first line of trees, a chill crept up his spine. The air was still, too still. The leaves did not rustle. The crickets did not chirp. Only silence surrounded him. He took a deep breath and moved forward. With each step, the trees grew taller, their twisted branches reaching toward the sky like skeletal fingers. The deeper he went, the more he felt as if unseen eyes were watching him. Then he heard it. A whisper. Soft, barely audible, like a breath against his ear. "Sam." He froze. His lantern flickered. His hands trembled. "Who's there?" he called, his voice more uncertain than he'd hoped. The whisper came again, this time from the opposite direction. "Sam, come closer." A shiver ran down his spine. He turned the lantern in all directions, but nothing was there. His heartbeat quickened. He was sure his friends were playing a trick on him. "All right, guys, very funny," he said. "Come out now." Silence. The whisper returned, now behind him. "Run." Sam spun around, but the forest remained empty. The path he had taken was gone. The trees had shifted. The darkness seemed heavier, as if it was pressing against him. His breath quickened. The lantern dimmed again. He banged on it, trying to make it brighter, but the flame sputtered. Then he heard footsteps, soft, slow, deliberate. They were coming closer. He ran. Branches tore at his clothes, roots tripped his feet, but he didn't stop. The whispers grew louder, overlapping voices calling his name in eerie harmony. "Sam, Sam, Sam." He could see a faint glow ahead. A clearing. He pushed forward, lungs burning, heart pounding. He burst into the clearing, gasping for air. But he wasn't alone. In the dim lantern light, he saw them, shadows. Tall, thin figures standing in a perfect circle around him. Their faces were blank, but their mouths moved in silent whispers. Sam tried to scream, but his voice wouldn't come. The lantern finally died, plunging him into darkness. And then, silence. The next morning, the villagers found the lantern near the forest's edge. The glass was cracked, the handle still warm. But Sam was never seen again. And on quiet nights, when the wind died down, the villagers swore they could hear whispers drifting from the trees, calling a name. Sam. Story 2. The House That Remembers. In a small, forgotten town, at the end of a winding dirt road, stood an old house. No one lived there anymore, but everyone knew its history. Decades ago, a family of 5 had vanished inside, leaving nothing but whispers of their fate. The house remained untouched, its windows dark, its walls cracked, as if waiting for someone to return. No one dared step inside, except for Daniel. Daniel was 17, tall and fearless. He had grown up hearing the stories, but never believed them. "A house can't be haunted," he scoffed whenever the topic came up. "It's just wood and stone." One evening, as a storm rolled in, Daniel's friends dared him to spend the night inside the house. "Just till sunrise," they teased. "If you last till morning, you'll be a legend." Daniel smirked. "Easy." With only a flashlight and a backpack, he made his way to the house. The air grew colder as he approached, the wind howling through broken windows. He hesitated for just a moment before pushing open the heavy wooden door. It creaked loudly, echoing through the empty rooms. Inside, dust blanketed everything. A grand staircase loomed ahead, its steps warped with age. Faded paintings hung on the walls, their eyes seeming to follow him as he moved. The air smelled of mildew and something else, something rotten. Ignoring the uneasy feeling creeping up his spine, Daniel sat up in the large living room. He rolled out a sleeping bag near the fireplace and turned on his flashlight. The beam flickered for a second before steadying. Then he heard it, a soft thump from upstairs. His pulse quickened, probably just the wind. He ignored it and kept unpacking. Thump. This time, it was louder. Daniel swallowed hard. His flashlight beam trembled slightly as he pointed it toward the staircase. "Hello?" he called, half expecting a raccoon to scurry out. Silence. Then, a whisper. Not just one, but many. Daniel's skin prickled. He could hear faint voices, overlapping, distant, as if trapped within the walls. He turned, ready to leave, but then the door slammed shut behind him. His breath caught in his throat. He rushed to the door, gripping the handle. It wouldn't budge. He twisted it harder, panic rising in his chest. Then a voice right behind him. Daniel. He spun around, the flashlight shaking in his grip. No one was there. The whispers grew louder, swirling around him, pressing against his ears. He backed away, bumping into an old wooden chair. The fireplace, which had been cold and empty, suddenly roared to life with blue flames. Shadows flickered along the walls. Then footsteps. Slow, deliberate, coming down the staircase. Daniel's flashlight flickered as he pointed it toward the steps. And there, at the top of the stairs, stood a man. His face was hollow, his skin pale and stretched too thin. His eyes were black pits, his mouth, too wide, twisted into a grotesque grin. Daniel's stomach turned. He stepped back, his heartbeat hammering against his ribs. The man tilted his head in an unnatural way, as if studying him. Then the thing spoke. "You came back." Daniel shook his head. "No, I don't. You left us." More whispers joined, rising into a deafening chorus. "You forgot us." Daniel stumbled backward, hands shaking. His foot caught on the edge of the rug, and he crashed to the ground. The whispers stopped all at once. Silence. Then a single final whisper. "Now you stay." The lights went out. The next morning, when his friends came looking for him, they found his backpack near the fireplace. His flashlight lay beside it, its battery drained. But Daniel was gone. The only thing left was a whisper in the air, repeating a single name. Daniel. And from the upstairs window, a shadow watched them leave. Welcome. Tonight, we bring you a new story. A story so terrifying, it will send chills down your spine. Dark nights, empty hallways, and a secret. A secret no one has ever heard before. Get ready, because this is not just any story. This is horror at its finest. The Cursed Road. In a quiet village in Western Europe, there was an old abandoned road known as Raven's Hollow Road. Decades ago, it was the main route connecting the village to the nearby town, but after a series of horrifying accidents, the road was shut down. Locals whispered that those who traveled on it after midnight were never seen again. Some claimed to have heard screams coming from the darkness, while others spoke of shadowy figures standing in the middle of the road, only to vanish when approached. Despite all the warnings, two best friends, Elias and Daniel, decided to test the legend. It was just a road after all, or so they thought. One evening, as the village prepared for a storm, Elias and Daniel were hanging out at an old cafe. That's when Daniel, smirking, said, "I bet the stories are all fake. Let's go there tonight. Just a quick walk, and we'll prove it's nothing but superstition." Elias hesitated. He had heard his grandfather say that the road was cursed, that it took more than just lives, it took souls. But not wanting to seem like a coward, he agreed. At exactly 11:45 p.m., under the cold silver moonlight, the two friends arrived at the entrance of Raven's Hollow Road. The trees on either side swayed violently, whispering secrets in the wind. The road stretched ahead, disappearing into a thick, unnatural mist. As they walked, the silence was unnerving. No crickets, no rustling leaves, but just an eerie stillness. The further they went, the colder the air became, and the mist thickened. Then they heard it. A faint, distant scream. Elias stopped in his tracks. "Did you hear that?" Daniel forced a laugh. "Just the wind." But his voice wavered. Suddenly, a flickering street lamp up ahead revealed something that made their blood run cold. A lone figure standing in the middle of the road. It was tall and motionless, its face hidden under a hood. Elias whispered, "Maybe we should go back." But as soon as they turned around, the road behind them was gone. Instead, there was only darkness, an endless, suffocating void. Panic set in. This isn't possible," Daniel stammered. A low, guttural voice echoed through the fog. "You shouldn't have come." The hooded figure moved, not by walking, but as if it was gliding toward them, and its body twisted unnaturally, its limbs jerking in ways no human should move. The air grew thick with a putrid smell like rotting flesh. The friends stumbled backward, but the road beneath them shifted, stretching longer, as if trapping them inside a never-ending nightmare. Then the screams started, not from them, but from the shadows lurking within the mist. Elias and Daniel ran, their breaths ragged, but no matter how far they went, the road never ended. Then Elias saw something, an old rusted road sign half buried in the dirt. Scraping away the moss, he read the words, "Raven's Hollow Road. Beware, the souls of the lost never leave." His eyes widened. "Daniel, this isn't a normal road. It's a trap. It doesn't let people leave." Daniel's face turned pale. "Then how do we escape?" A whispering chorus surrounded them, dozens of voices crying out in agony. "Help us! Free us! Run!" Then the hooded figure lunged. Elias didn't think. He grabbed Daniel's hand and sprinted toward the only thing that looked real, the flickering street lamp ahead. The moment they crossed under its dim glow, the road behind them collapsed, swallowed by the mist. The screams faded, the air cleared. They were standing at the village entrance. The road was gone. They looked at each other, their faces drained of color. "Never again," Daniel whispered. As they turned to leave, Elias glanced at the closed road sign. But now, beneath the faded letters, something new was scratched into the wood. "See you again soon." And in the distance, the road's shadows shifted. The shadow of darkness. In a small yet ancient village in Western Europe, St. Martin's School stood tall, a century-old structure made of worn-out bricks. By day it seemed like any other school, but as dusk fell, an eerie presence seemed to creep through its hallways. Students and teachers often complained about strange whispers echoing through the empty rooms at night, old wooden desks rattling on their own, and shadows that seemed to move. Yet, Whenever a teacher or caretaker tried to investigate, they found nothing unusual. Elias, a 14-year-old boy, had just transferred to this school. His parents were often away for work, so he had come to live with his uncle in the village. Elias didn't believe in ghost stories, but on his first day, he realized something was definitely wrong. That evening, when he went to the library to collect his books, he felt a presence behind him. But when he turned around, no one was there. Later that night, he had a terrifying dream. He saw a shadowy figure standing in a long corridor, slowly moving towards him. Just as it was about to reach him, Elias woke up, his heart pounding in his chest. The next day, Elias shared his dream with his new friends, Sophie and Daniel. Daniel nodded solemnly. That wasn't just a dream. Something is really here, watching us. Determined to find out the truth, they decided to dig into the school's old records, buried within dusty archives. They discovered something horrifying. The school had been built in 1920, but in 1954, several students mysteriously disappeared after an accident. Their cases were left unsolved, and the school continued as if nothing had happened. Determined to uncover the mystery, the trio sneaked into the school at midnight through a back window. The long, dark corridor stretched before them, and as they moved forward, a chilling wind swept past, carrying with it ghostly whispers. You shouldn't have come. Leave, or you will disappear too. Suddenly, Sophie gasped, Look over there. In the dim light, an old mirror, covered in dust and locked away for years, began to tremble. Within its cracked surface, a shadowy figure emerged. It had no face, only a void of darkness where its head should have been. Slowly, it started moving towards them. Elias swallowed his fear and asked, Who are you? The shadow responded in a trembling voice, We are the ones who were buried here. We are the ones this school swallowed whole. Elias's mind raced back to the records. These were the missing students. Their spirits had been trapped in this school all along. Realizing the mirror was the key to their imprisonment, Elias grabbed a piece of broken glass and smashed it against the ground. The shadow let out a piercing scream as red stains, like blood, seeped from the walls. This mirror is their prison, Sophie shouted. Without hesitation, Daniel grabbed a metal rod and struck the mirror with all his strength. The glass shattered, and with it, the shadow dissolved into a wisp of smoke. The eerie whispers faded, and the red stains on the walls slowly disappeared. The next morning, authorities discovered a hidden basement beneath the school's old library. It was once used as a punishment chamber, where students were locked away. Those who had vanished all those years ago had never left. Their remains were found buried in the dark. Elias, Sophie, and Daniel had exposed the truth. The school was permanently shut down. But some say that if you pass by the abandoned school at night, you can still hear faint footsteps echoing through the halls, as if someone is still waiting. And that was today's story. But was it real or just a trick of the mind? I'll leave that for you to decide. But remember, never walk alone in the dark, because something is always watching you. We'll be back soon with another terrifying tale. Until then, keep your lights on. Today's story is The Silent Watcher. It was a stormy night, and the rain battered the windows like desperate fingers trying to claw their way inside. Ethan sat alone in his dimly lit living room, scrolling mindlessly on his phone. His parents were out of town, and his younger sister was staying at a friend's house. He had the entire house to himself. At first, it felt exciting. No rules, no interruptions, just him and his late-night movie. But as the night wore on, an eerie silence settled over the house, the kind that made you hyper-aware of every creak, every rustling sound, every shadow shifting in the corners of your vision. Ethan shrugged it off, telling himself it was just the wind. But then the TV suddenly shut off by itself. Frowning, he reached for the remote and turned the TV back on. The screen flickered for a moment before settling back into the movie. Then came a soft thud from upstairs. Ethan froze. His heart pounded against his ribs. The house was locked. He was alone, wasn't he? He turned the volume down, listening. Another thud. It sounded like footsteps, soft, deliberate, moving across the wooden floor upstairs. Ethan grabbed his phone and turned on the flashlight, standing cautiously. "Hello?" he called out, hating how uncertain his voice sounded. No answer. For a few moments, there was nothing but silence. Then, just as he was about to convince himself it was all in his head, a door creaked open upstairs. Cold dread coiled around Ethan's spine. He slowly climbed the stairs, his pulse hammering in his ears. The hallway was dark, but he could see that his bedroom door was slightly open. He was certain he had closed it before coming downstairs. He hesitated, then pushed it open wider. His room was empty, nothing out of place. His closet door was slightly ajar, but that was normal. Then, just as he was about to leave, he noticed something. His bed. The blanket was bunched up, raised slightly, as if someone was hiding underneath it. Ethan's breath hitched. He swallowed hard and, with shaky fingers, reached forward. He gripped the edge of the blanket and, in one swift motion, yanked it away. Nothing. His mind screamed at him to get out of the house, but before he could react, his closet door slammed shut. Ethan stumbled back, his flashlight shaking in his hand. He stared at the closet, paralyzed. He had to get out. Now! Then, slowly, agonizingly slow, the closet door creaked open, and he saw it. A figure crouched inside, its body twisted and elongated, its eyes black and hollow. It grinned at him with jagged, uneven teeth, whispering in a voice that wasn't human. "I've been watching you all night." Ethan didn't scream. He couldn't. His legs finally obeyed and he bolted, nearly tumbling down the stairs. He sprinted to the front door, fumbling with the lock, his fingers numb with fear. Just as he threw the door open, he dared one last glance back. The figure stood at the top of the stairs, watching him. Then, as the lightning flashed, it was suddenly right behind him. The neighbors found the front door wide open the next morning. Ethan was gone. His phone lay on the porch, its screen cracked. The only clue left behind was a message written in jagged letters on the wall of his bedroom. "He let me in." The end. Next story is The Unseen Guest. The power had gone out an hour ago, plunging the house into darkness. Aisha sat alone in the living room, gripping her phone tightly. The only light came from the candle she had placed on the coffee table, its flickering flame casting eerie shadows on the walls. The wind outside howled through the trees, and every now and then a loose branch scraped against the window, making her jump. Her parents had gone to attend a family wedding in another city, leaving her alone for the night. She had initially enjoyed the solitude, watching movies and scrolling through her phone without interruption. But as the hours passed, the silence in the house became heavier, pressing down on her like an invisible force. She sighed and tried to shake off the uneasiness, convincing herself that it was just her imagination playing tricks on her. Just as she was about to get up and head to bed, she heard it, a soft rustling sound from the kitchen. Aisha froze, her breath caught in her throat. The house was locked. There shouldn't be anyone inside. She slowly turned her head toward the kitchen doorway, her heart hammering in her chest. The darkness beyond the candlelight was thick, impenetrable. For a moment, she thought she had imagined the sound, but then a chair scraped against the floor. Panic surged through her veins. Someone was in there, someone she couldn't see. She reached for her phone with trembling fingers, quickly opening the dial pad to call her parents. But before she could press the call button, her phone screen flickered and went black. The battery had died. A deep silence followed. Aisha held her breath, listening. Then came another noise, a slow, deliberate footstep from the kitchen. She had to move, had to get out. But her body felt frozen in place. Then another step, closer this time. Her survival instincts kicked in. She grabbed the candle, clutching it tightly as she stood up. She tiptoed toward the front door, barely breathing. As she reached for the lock, she heard it. A voice, low and hoarse, coming from the kitchen. "Where are you going, Aisha?" Her blood ran cold, her legs buckled beneath her, and she nearly dropped the candle. The voice was familiar, but distorted. Slowly, painfully, she turned her head toward the kitchen. The darkness stretched before her, revealing nothing. But the presence was there, watching, waiting. Then, a sharp knock on the window. Aisha screamed and spun around. The candle slipped from her grip, crashing to the floor, plunging the room into complete darkness. For a few agonizing seconds, she sat there, paralyzed, her ears straining for any sound. Then, suddenly, the kitchen door creaked open. And this time, the footsteps weren't slow. They were running straight toward her. The end. Next story is The Thing in the Hallway. The clock struck midnight, and the house was drenched in an eerie silence. Armin sat in his dimly lit bedroom, his phone the only source of light. His parents were out of town, and his younger sister was at their grandmother's house. He had the entire house to himself for the weekend. The first few hours had been fun. Loud music, junk food, and endless scrolling on his phone. But now, as the night deepened, a strange uneasiness settled over him. He convinced himself that it was just the silence playing tricks on his mind. But then he heard it, a faint tap, 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 coming from the hallway outside his room. He froze, his fingers hovering over the phone screen. The sound was so light, so deliberate, that for a moment he wondered if he had imagined it. Then it came again. Tap, tap, tap. Armin swallowed hard. His house was locked. The doors, the windows, everything was shut tight. He was alone, or at least he was supposed to be. He turned on his phone flashlight and pointed it toward the doorway. The hallway outside his room stretched into darkness. He couldn't see anything unusual, but the feeling of being watched sent a chill down his spine. Taking a deep breath, he got up and slowly stepped toward the door. "Hello?" he called out, his voice barely above a whisper. No response. He hesitated before stepping out into the hallway. The house felt different now, colder, heavier. He peered into the darkness, his heart pounding. There was nothing. Just as he was about to turn back, a soft knock came from the front door downstairs. His breath caught in his throat. It was almost 1 a.m. Who would be knocking at this hour? Slowly, cautiously, he made his way downstairs. The wooden floor creaked beneath his feet, the sound unnervingly loud in the silence. As he reached the front door, he hesitated. Something felt wrong. He placed his eye against the peephole, expecting to see a late-night visitor. But there was no one there. His skin prickled. Another knock came, louder this time. Armin's breathing grew shallow. He reached for the lock, but then stopped himself. He had seen enough horror movies to know this wasn't normal. Summoning his courage, he whispered, "Who's there?" For a few moments, there was silence. Then, in a voice so low it barely registered as human, someone whispered back, "Let me in." Armin stumbled backward, his heart racing. He turned and bolted up the stairs, his instincts screaming at him to get away from the door. As he reached his room and slammed the door shut, his phone vibrated violently in his hand. A message. No number, no name. It read, "I'm already inside." A cold dread settled over him as he heard the soft tap, tap, tap start again, this time right outside his bedroom door. He backed away, clutching his phone tightly, praying this was all some twisted dream. He grabbed a baseball bat from the corner of his room and positioned himself near the door, ready to swing at whatever was on the other side. For several minutes, nothing happened. The tapping stopped. Silence stretched through the house, heavy and suffocating. Then, just when he thought it was over, the door handle started turning. Armin didn't wait. He swung the door open and lashed out with the bat, but there was nothing there. The hallway was empty. His breathing came in ragged gasps as he took slow steps forward, scanning every corner, every shadow. Then, from the mirror at the end of the hallway, a reflection moved. But it wasn't his. A twisted, grinning figure stood behind him in the mirror, its eyes hollow and dark, its hand reaching for his shoulder. Armin spun around with a scream, but there was no one there. His heart nearly stopped. His hands shook as he took a step back toward his room. His only thought was to lock himself inside, to call for help, till the lights flickered. A voice, raspy and hollow, whispered in his ear, "You shouldn't have opened the door." Armin's vision blurred as everything around him turned to darkness. The next morning, his parents returned to find him curled up in his bed, shaking but unharmed. He told them about the night, about the knocks, the whispers, the thing in the mirror. They searched the entire house. Every door was locked, every window shut. There was no sign of forced entry. But on the inside of the front door, long, jagged scratches ran across the wood as if something had been trying to get in. And that was today's story. But was it real or just a trick of the mind? I'll leave that for you to decide. But remember, never walk alone in the dark, because something is always watching you. We'll be back soon with another terrifying tale. Until then, keep your lights on. Today's story is The Last Night Shift. It was 2:37 a.m. when Adam felt the first sign that something was wrong. The supermarket was silent, except for the soft hum of the refrigerators and the flickering neon light outside. His shift had started at 10 p.m. like every night, but tonight felt different. There was a strange tension in the air, something heavy pressing down on his chest. Adam worked as a night cashier at Meadowmart Superstore, a 24-hour supermarket on the edge of town. It was a boring job, but easy money. Most nights, the store was empty, except for a few drunk customers or late-night snack hunters. His only company was the CCTV screens behind the counter, showing different aisles of the store. But tonight, the store was empty, completely empty. No customers, no deliveries, just Adam and something else. At 3:02 a.m., the automatic doors slid open, but no one entered. The cold night wind blew inside, making the plastic candy wrappers on the counter flutter. Adam frowned. He checked the security cameras, but there was no one there. The doors stayed open for exactly 30 seconds, then slid shut. A glitch? Maybe. Then a low beep came from the self-checkout machine. Please scan your items. Adam looked up. The screen was active. Someone had triggered it. He leaned over the counter, staring at the machine, but nothing. No items, no customers. Just the bright blue screen asking for a payment method. His stomach tightened. This wasn't normal. He sighed, grabbing his walkie-talkie. Hey, Alex, you seen this? The checkout's acting weird. Silence. Isa. Alex? Still no response. Alex was the store manager and always monitored the security system from his office upstairs. Even if he was asleep, he always replied. But now, only static came from the radio. Adam's fingers curled around the radio. Something was wrong. At 3:15 a.m., Adam checked the cameras again. The aisle 7 feed was glitching, the screen flickering with static. He stared at the distorted image. Yeah, and then he saw it. A tall, thin figure stood at the far end of the aisle. The camera quality wasn't great, but Adam could make out its long black coat and wide, expressionless face. The figure wasn't moving. Adam's heartbeat pounded in his ears. There was no way someone had entered the store without him seeing them. He looked at the front doors, still locked. He turned back to the screen. The figure was closer now. Still in aisle 7, still standing, but now its head was tilted slightly, as if it knew Adam was watching. Adam's breath hitched. He grabbed the store phone and dialed Alex's office. Ringing, click. A deep, distorted voice answered, "Leave." Then the line went dead. At 3:30 a.m., Adam forced himself to check Alex's office. The door was slightly open, a dim light coming from inside. He pushed it open, and his stomach dropped. Alex was there, but he wasn't alive. His lifeless body was slumped over the security monitors, his head tilted at an unnatural angle. The computer screens flickered, showing static and distorted images of the store. And in every single camera feed stood the same figure from aisle 7. But now it was in every aisle, watching, waiting. Adam stumbled back, his breath quick and shallow. He had to get out. Now. As Adam ran back to the main floor, the lights above started to flicker. The automatic doors, his only way out, were still locked. Then from behind him, Adam. He froze. The voice was low, unnatural, echoing around him. Slowly, he turned his head. The figure was standing just a few feet away, staring at him. Its skin was pale, almost translucent. Its eyes were sunken black voids, and its mouth was too wide, stretching unnaturally. Adam tried to move, but his legs wouldn't work. The figure tilted its head again, and then, with a slow, unnatural motion, it raised its bony hand, pointing directly at Adam. The store went completely dark. The next morning, When the early shift employees arrived, they found the supermarket completely normal. Everything was in place, except for two things. Alex's body was still in his office, and Adam was gone. The security footage? It showed Adam running in terror, and then suddenly disappearing. No one ever saw him again. Next story is The Mummy in the Night Shift. It was past midnight when the silence inside the museum became deafening. Noah adjusted his chair, staring at the security monitors in front of him. It was his third week working the night shift at the Westmore Museum, and he had already grown used to the eerie stillness of the exhibits. But tonight, something felt different. The museum was empty except for the ancient artifacts that had stood in their glass cases for centuries. Statues of forgotten gods loomed in the corners, their stone eyes staring into nothingness. The Egyptian exhibit, one of the museum's main attractions, occupied the farthest hall, where a newly acquired sarcophagus had been displayed just a few days ago. The museum director, Mr. Evans, had told Noah that it belonged to an unknown pharaoh, and experts were still deciphering the hieroglyphs on its surface. Noah wasn't superstitious, but there was something unsettling about the sarcophagus. Its lid was sculpted with the image of a man with hollow eyes, and the golden symbols etched into the sides seemed to glisten under the dim museum lights. At exactly 1:43 a.m., the temperature in the security room dropped. The small digital clock on Noah's desk flickered, the numbers distorting for a second before stabilizing. He frowned, rubbing his arms. Then a soft thump echoed through the halls. Noah's eyes snapped to the monitors. The camera feed from the Egyptian exhibit was glitching, lines of static distorting the view. But in the brief moments when the screen cleared, he noticed something that made his stomach tighten. The sarcophagus lid was slightly open. It had been sealed earlier that day. He was sure of it. A cold sweat formed on his forehead. He reached for his radio. "Mr. Evans, are you there?" Static. "Hello? Anyone?" More static. A strange noise crackled through the speakers. A whisper. It was faint, distant, like something speaking in an ancient tongue. Noah's hand froze over the controls. The whispering grew louder, an eerie chant filling the empty halls. Then, silence. Noah exhaled, forcing himself to stand. He had to check the exhibit. As he stepped into the dimly lit hallways, the air grew heavier. Each step echoed loudly against the marble floors. The Egyptian exhibit was just around the corner, past the towering statues of Anubis and Horus. The moment he entered the room, a shiver ran down his spine. The sarcophagus lid was completely off. Noah's breath hitched. The glass barrier that surrounded the display had shattered, shards glittering on the floor. The hieroglyphs on the sarcophagus seemed darker, as if freshly carved. Something had been inside that coffin, and now it was gone. A deep, raspy breath came from behind him. Noah spun around, his heart hammering against his ribs. At first, he saw nothing, just the dimly lit statues and empty corridors stretching into the darkness. Then, movement. A tall, thin figure emerged from the shadows. Its body was wrapped in ancient, tattered bandages, some torn away to reveal leathery, decayed skin beneath. Its eye sockets were hollow pits of darkness, but something shimmered deep inside them. Something alive. Noah took a step back, The creature moved unnaturally, its limbs bending at odd angles as it dragged itself forward. Its bandaged fingers twitched, reaching toward him. "No," Noah whispered. The mummy let out a low, guttural groan. Then it charged. Noah bolted. He sprinted past the artifacts, weaving between glass cases as the heavy footsteps of the creature pounded behind him. He could hear the rustling of the bandages, the creaking of ancient bones. He reached the security room, slamming the door shut and locking it. His breath came in ragged gasps as he grabbed his phone. No signal. The screens flickered again, the Egyptian exhibit's camera flashing between static and a horrifying sight. The mummy standing just outside the security room. It was staring at the door. The lights flickered. A deep voice, ancient and powerful, whispered through the radio. "You are not welcome." Noah's fingers trembled as he gripped the radio. "What do you want?" Silence. Then thump. The door shook. Noah stumbled back. Thump. A crack formed in the wood. The air grew impossibly cold. The museum walls seemed to pulse, the ancient symbols on the artifacts glowing faintly. The whispers returned, a chorus of voices speaking in a language long forgotten. Then the door burst open. Darkness swallowed the room. The next morning, when the museum staff arrived, everything seemed normal. Except for one thing. The security room was empty. The chair was overturned, the radio lying on the floor. The only sign that Noah had ever been there was the faint outline of a human handprint on the security monitor. And the sarcophagus? It was sealed shut again. But this time, there were fresh fingerprints on the inside of the lid. And that was today's story. But was it real, or just a trick of the mind? I'll leave that for you to decide. But remember, never walk alone in the dark, because something is always watching you. We'll be back soon with another terrifying tale. Until then, keep your lights on. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Your support keeps these stories alive and the nightmares coming. I'll leave that for you to decide. But remember, never walk alone in the dark, because something is always watching you. We'll be back soon with another terrifying tale. Until then, keep your lights on. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Your support keeps these stories alive and the nightmares coming.